Good morning. It's me, Robert Phoenix. Welcome to the Astro Weather. Hey, just kind of easing into it. It's Halloween. I don't want to scare you. And the veils are thin, aren't they, supposedly? Where the precocious spirits uh, transmigrate back and forth between realms. I live out here in the country, and no way anybody's going to come here for Halloween. I mean, that's been the way it is for the last 2 years. You had nobody at the door, period, end of story. But I did enjoy Halloween as a youth. I did enjoy dressing up in various costumes. And as we got older, buying flats of eggs and throwing eggs at each other. That was always fun. A little mischief on Halloween. How is everybody? It is cold. It's cold here. We got down to the we're at around 38 yesterday, which is pretty chilly for us out in these parts of the Texas Hill Country. And it looks like it's going to be around 40 degrees, so we got a bit of a cold snap coming in. I think across the country. What is it? The polar freeze, whatever newfangled description they have for weather these days. We're in dark times. Just going to say it straight up. We are definitely in Scorpio season. And last night on Sirius Sports, Al and I were talking about this hockey player. I believe it's Adam Johnson, and he plays hockey in. What happened here? He plays hockey in the English Hockey League, and he was playing against the team in Sheffield. And this other player, going by the very weird name of Matt Petgrave. This other player during the hockey match, as Adam Johnson is skating by, Matt Petgrave gets up in the air and does like a Bruce Lee sidekick with the blades of his skate, and he essentially, hits the jugular vein in Adam Johnson. And Adam Johnson winds up dying, right? Like, this is like death on the ice. This is such a Scorpio season kind of moment, right? Not only is it taking place on the dark time of the year, but even ice, which is frozen water, right? You get frozen water during the dark time of the year, unless you're artificially playing it on hockey. But it's it's symbolic of that. But as we were looking at Adam Johnson's chart, he has the South Node conjunct Algol, and Mars conjunct the South Node. It's like, well, holy shit. I mean, when you deal with Algol, you're dealing with things like decapitation and lynchings and beheadings, all that stuff, right? And sure enough, this is the coup de grace of Adam Johnson's not just playing career, but life. And then if you follow the eclipse, I mean, the lunar eclipse eventually, crosses over, his Mars in Taurus and his South Node in Taurus. So this is, astrology sometimes is really the smoking gun when you can look at some of this stuff in a big way, right? But just absolutely shocking. And it's even more shocking when you watch the video because it just seems completely premeditated. And in a weird way, it's kind of a metaphor for our times. We're dealing with the prospect of war. I think it was last night during Sirius Sports where Tom came in and said that Biden is going to bring the War Powers Act to the Congress. And once the War Powers Act comes in, we're in a state of war. And, people don't understand this. I mean, it's a very big deal because not only does it officially put us in the ring what it does is it changes potentially everything we do domestically. Like under a state of war, they can seize lots of things, right? They can seize rations. They can. I mean, seriously, they can commandeer resources from the general public for the war effort. This is terrible. And people are not going to like it. You know, as much as they've done to whip up a frenzy and get people all hot and lathered to go to war, I still think that there is not much of a taste in this country. You know, this is why Mike Johnson was named Speaker of the House, because Mike Johnson is pot committed. And he's pot committed because of his religious background. He's a millennialist, he's a dispensationalist. So when you begin to look at it through through this lens, and you look at it through Scorpio, right? Scorpio is the end of something. And there is the promise of the beginning of something, but that's not always guaranteed with Scorpio. You may have to live at the end for a while. You know, it's kind of like when you break up with somebody in a relationship. You know, how many times have you broke up with somebody in a relationship and you find out the other person does a lot better, quicker, right? That was always my experience. It's like, oh shit, right? Um, and then you think, okay, well, I'm going to move on to the next person, or I'm going to move on to the next situation, and it doesn't really happen that way. Or if it does, it doesn't happen in quote unquote your time. There's always something weird that goes on, right? And this is what Scorpio brings about. You know, so we're at the end, and you know, this could be a filter for what a lot of people would say, end times. I don't necessarily believe it in the biblical sense, because I think that that is a script, and they made the script and they're following the script. However, that said, whether it's through social engineering or through our own inability to participate in society, a lot of our cultural institutions are coming to an end. So the feeling of death is clearly in the air, because it's the time of the season, right? It's the time of the year. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. So there are two signs where endings really um, become apparent, and it's Scorpio and Pisces, because Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, right? So you're cycling out of the entire wheel. But here we are. We're right in the thick of it now. So why don't we check out the Astro Weather and see what the immediate stars have to say to us, the luminaries speaking to us. Let's see. Look at that. Kelly and kids, single Scorpio, 4 years strong now. Good for you, Kelly. Hold out. Don't jump into the pool unless you know who you're swimming with. Okay. You really know there's someone. So here's our sun, 8 degrees. We have the right. Oh, hold on. This is what is going on here. This is the wrong one. My bad. Hello, that doesn't work. We got a digit off. We got a digit off. Hold on a second. I was like, what is this chart? I can't read this fucking chart. There we go. Take two. This is not where we're at. See, that's where a seasoned astrologer comes into play. Here we go. Yeah, it's interesting. You guys know that I follow Jason Whitlock in his show Fearless, and he got into a big beef with Royce White and kicked Royce off the show. And it's like, well, why is that important? It's an ending, right? It represents an ending. And Jason found Royce on Twitter, and Royce built up a pretty strong following through Jason's show. I don't want to get into their beef, but it's just another one of these pieces around endings that I'm just, putting the spotlight on. Okay, here's the sun at 7 degrees Scorpio. Remember now, on the 14th, we're going to have that Sun Mars conjunction, which is, again, fairly rare. And boy, if there's ever a war aspect, it's that Sun Mars Scorpio conjunction. Mars and Mercury, we had them theoretically Kazemi, which I got into on Saturday night. And I just think instead of the diminishing of the two, they become more powerful. But it's also more difficult to separate the influence of the two celestials, right? So now Mercury has separated just a little bit, and it's out in front now. Mercury had been retrograde, had been behind the sun, and now it's here. And out in front of Mars like this, there is a more cerebral, theoretical approach. Maybe cooler heads will prevail uh, with Mercury ahead of Mars. So we're not just jumping in feet first, which is what Mars would do. It's like, let's kill them all and let God sort out the rest. That's the Mars approach ahead of the sun and ahead of Mercury. Here, Mercury is now the other side of this, though, is that Mercury can be very cagey, especially in Scorpio, and can convince people of their what's the word I'm looking for, their own certitude about what they're doing, because we're dealing with fixed signs here, right? We're dealing with fixed sign in Scorpio, and then over here fixed sign in Taurus. So people can be absolutely convinced that uh, their path is the right path, and Mercury and Scorpio can be very cagey. It can be psychologically powerful and at times manipulative. Okay. Now, how does this relate to you? Sometimes you have to look after your own self interests, but I always feel like you have to do a bit of a quality control check when you do that, right? You have to have an audit of your self interest, and if you are aligned with your self interest, meaning that it serves a higher purpose or serves a higher good, then you can move on it, right? You can move on this. Now, it could be anything from somebody that wants to finagle your position at work, and that it's not right, and that self being very self-interested, that you like your position or it's important, or what you get from it in terms of money is important, right? That would be your self-interest dovetailing with your personal audit, right? You want to maintain your turf, you want to maintain your territory. You don't want anybody else coming in and saying, what, I really want what you have. To me, that's when self-interest becomes important, like you're defending your resources. So self-interest, can be, I don't want to say it can be qualified, but I think it's important, because if you don't have it, people will squash you like a bug. So this is where Mercury comes into play here in this stellium. If you want to throw a series in there, we can. But it's, here, if we're just looking at self, right, with Mercury and Ceres, it's about nurturing, your ability to be psychologically adept and to move through the world in a way where you do preserve your own interests, but you don't do it with a hammer. That's not how Scorpio works. You do it with a whisper, or you do it in a way where um, your influence is informing the situation, right? When I say informing, meaning that your influence is subtly informing the situation. So there's a lot of intel gathering that also goes on with Mercury and Scorpio. So as Mercury separates here, one of the things, just again on a personal level, that I would recommend is to research and do your groundwork before you act. Once Mercury gets out here with about a 4 to 5 degree orb, so we're one degree out, 3 days from now, Mercury will be in that sweet spot. And, anytime you get within 3 degrees on the orb, it starts to get wonky. 4 degrees, you begin to manage the potential of the conjunction. So again, if you're really looking to understand certain things about who you are, where you are in your life, do a little legwork now. Don't really act, but in 3 days, you'll have enough information if you apply your brain power and the ability to research and to go deep and understand people's motivations. And this is one of the things that the West has been very Americans. I'll use Americans. Americans have been very naive about in a lot of ways. Europeans have had centuries of cynicism, right? So they understand how things like failed governments or monarchies, revolutions, the socialist burden of tax on their systems, etc. So Europeans, they understand it, although they're jaded. A lot of Europeans are quite jaded. Not all, but a lot are, because they've had time to kind of go through this and understand, how things like power, motivation work. We're starting to come around, and unfortunately, we're coming around because we're being sort of taken through the darkness, right? And we're understanding things more, so we're becoming more psychologically adept. And the idea here is to become psychologically adept and understand people's motivations, whether they're positive or whether they're negative or dark, without that understanding crippling you or keeping you from being open to experience or having a more open system, right? So this is really what did Jesus say? To be wise like a serpent. You need to be wise like a serpent, but playful like a dolphin. Really, I mean that's the metaphor that I would use. So today, just today, we're looking at this yod, and the yod is connecting the moon and Chiron into Mars and Mercury, right? So both of them are the recipients of this yod, and Chiron and the moon in Gemini, which is being able to put things into two separate buckets, right? Being able to see something and feel something can be sometimes two different things in Gemini. It's of all the moons, it's I would say the second most objective moon behind the Aquarian moon, which is really objective. But with Gemini, you can have the experience, the emotional experience, and also invoke the witness. Right? And the witness is the other part of Gemini. So here we have this Chiron sextile to the moon today, which brings in, whenever we talk about Chiron, we talk about, this whole idea of vulnerability, of course. But with the sextile to the moon, I think what Chiron is doing here is it's giving you permission to explore what you're feeling in a way that might be a little less hindered, right? Because Gemini doesn't have a problem with mixing things up. Like Gemini can hang out with the taboo in some ways as a semi-detached observer, right? Now, the other thing is that the moon is all about emotional values. That's the nature of the moon, emotional values. And watch out today for people trying to psychologically move you emotionally. Because again, we're coming right back here. We're really trying to peel back the layers. What's the motivation? Who does it serve? Cui bono? Who gets paid? Right? These are questions that we should be asking today. We should ask them all the time. But today is one of those days because it feels like in the general picture, in the general pop, there's going to be a great deal of psychological motivation to go to war. Right? We have Chiron and Aries, Aries being the sign of war and battle, and it will progress through the day. And the messaging might get, a lot of people, well, not a lot because people really don't watch mainstream media anymore, but people will tune into the news. That happens at night, right? So by the time we get into the evening, the moon in Gemini will probably be around 20 degrees. It'll still be in sextile with Chiron. That's when the psychological uh, potential or the psychological mind really kicks in. Now, what's interesting, and this brings us back to Halloween and the bigger picture stuff, if the veils are thin, think about this for a moment. If the veils are thin and they are wanting to push the war agenda on Halloween, they are piggybacking on Halloween. They're piggybacking on the thinning of the veils. They're piggybacking on this night where people can and have experienced some degree of terror because this is what this night is ostensibly about, right? You as a child you wear a costume so that you can, for a brief period of time, especially if it's a scary costume, for a brief period of time, you can hug the shadow, right? All the things that as a kid you're afraid of, and the things that live under your bed, theoretically, for a moment, you're able to embody them, and they become less scary. Like you're able to take on those qualities for a period of time, project them, and then put the costume away. Right? It's kind of like a horror movie back in the old days where the monster gets killed at the end. That's what Halloween is about. Psychologically, that's what it's about. You get to become the monster inside that you fear for a night, and then you let it out and you put it away, and you get to go back and, oh, well, that's good. Let's eat some candy, right? But this is a different operation. And if you look at the language and the rhetoric of war, especially this war, these people are beasts, right? How many times have you heard that over the last week? They're beasts, they're inhuman. This is all the language of Halloween. They're invoking the invective of Halloween. And so we are, in a very weird and interesting time where the veils are thin and they're trying to push the war football across the goal line. How about that? And that gets into the inconjunct, right? So you want to have your high beams on, both personally and collectively. Now, you may say, well, it doesn't really matter, but it does matter. Awareness and consciousness do matter. Don't ever forget that. The other thing with this Gemini moon, which is also quite interesting, is how they've mashed this thing up. It's amazing. So if you're opposed to war and you're physically opposed to sending uh, money to another country, fill in the blank of the country. It doesn't have to begin with an I and end with an L, or it doesn't have to begin with a U and end with an E. Like, let's just say you've just had it, you're fed up. It's like, come on, we're having a hard time here. Just stop it already. Let's say on fiscal reasons, or let's say on humanitarian reasons. And you're like, no, there's got to be a better way of doing this. You know, ultimately, war is sometimes a necessary evil, but it's only a necessary evil when you have to defend what you have, right? That is the time when war becomes real. And what happened in 2001 with 9/11 is they created the Patriot Act, which gave the United States the ability to preemptively strike countries that they felt were going to be aggressive. Unprecedented. We were never like that as a country, but they moved us into that. So again, look at the language of war. They're beasts, they're animals, they're inhuman. This is all like Twilight Halloween language. Um, Venus is really coming into this opposition with Neptune. And we could talk about sort of the fog of war, because Venus in Virgo, as much as it's sort of the old maid of the zodiac, there is something about Venus in Virgo that is, I think, valid and relevant. It's like looking at the nature and the purity of our relationships. And as the moon moves through Gemini, especially later tonight, just keep your eyes on tonight. Keep your eyes on tonight and the airwaves and what's being talked about. I guarantee you they're going to do everything in their power to psychologically move the masses. Venus in Virgo here is actually a pretty good buffer against that moon. Now, with the Neptune opposition, that's where it gets tricky, because now if you're anti-war, or you're anti-sending our money to the new country, you're lumped in with Hamas. You're lumped in with the socialist left, right? It is a very clever game that they've struck here. So people look at it and go, do I really want to be associated with that group? And then on the other side, you've got all these, fist pumping neocon hawks. And it's like, well, they seem like they've taken the moral high ground. Maybe I'll just chime in with them. No, not really. There is a middle ground if you can find it. And this is what Venus and Virgo is trying to do. It's trying to find the middle ground here. It's exactly what it's trying to do. And the more that we have Venus moving into this trine with Pluto, and we will over the next week, I think it's much easier to understand, getting back to the beginning, this idea of self-interest. Is it in our best interest as a country, as a people, as a globe? Not a globe. How about a realm? A lot of people don't use the word globe. As a realm, to indulge in this. Venus in Virgo hints at caution, right? It hints at caution, fiscal responsibility, potentially the loss of life. It is a very conservative aspect in the chart. But with the opposition with Neptune, we get into the fog of war, which is tricky, right? Very tricky. So on a personal level, again, today, gather more information, right? Do your due diligence. Do your due diligence. And in 3 days, when Mercury gets away from that Mars conjunction, you'll have a little more space to act and put your plan into action. Still a little tight today. And if you gather more information, trust me, in 3 days, you'll be able to. And a lot of you out there are generators. So all you have to do is respond to your situations. That's it. It's easy. Just respond. Okay. That's our Astro. Let's get into our star of the day. And it's kind of a fun star of the day. And it was a bit of a challenge to pick the star of the day, because there were some worthy candidates. For instance, not that he's anybody that you want to celebrate or emulate, but today is Jimmy Savile's birthday. And had Jimmy Savile had an A chart or even a B chart, I would have looked at his chart, because he's a monster, right? Think about that. Jimmy Savile was a monster. He was born on Halloween. Sometimes these things work out perfectly. Could have done Robert Sarver. It's like, well, who's Robert Sarver? Robert Sarver was the owner of the Phoenix Suns until they decided, they being the NBA, that they wanted him out. So guess what? They turned him into a monster. And they staged a coup d'etat. And now the Phoenix Suns are owned by Matt Ishbia. But today I wanted to have somebody who actually played a monster. In our True Hemp Science star of the day is none other than Michael Landon. And Michael Landon is a very interesting character. But before I get into his chart, let's talk about True Hemp Science. It's your one-stop shop for all things CBD, from their incredible gummies, the highly effective sleep gummies, to the highly stimulating moon dust gummies, to all of their elixirs, which are fantastic for lubricating your body, dealing with pain, dealing with inflammation, resetting some cellular response. It's all great stuff. There's alcohol based, there's water based, there's spagyrics, and you get it all at truehempscience.com. All you got to do is spend $100 or more and type in 15MINS. That's 15MINS, and you will get a free goodie bag. Well, you get a couple gummies, you'll get a few elixirs. You're like, oh, let me try this. Let me try this. It's like Christmas when your order arrives. And you spend $150 or more and you get free shipping. There's always a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can make an appointment with our friend Chris if you want to ask questions about his product. And all that is on his website, truehempscience.com. All right, so let's check out our guy, Michael Landon. And I thought he would be a great, kind of fun, kind of silly, right? But a great star of the day, because his first movie is I Was a Teenage Werewolf. And he has the sun in Scorpio in a 8-degree orb with his midheaven. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, right? You can see the sun, Scorpio, and the werewolf being a very kind of underworld character, right? And what's interesting is that with Chiron in the South Node in Gemini, he's got this interesting connection to taking on other identities. In fact, Michael Landon isn't even his real name. What's his real name? I just looked it up. Where is it? Let me see this thing. Hold on. And that's very Gemini, right? Michael Landon. His real name. Michael Landon's real name was Eugene Maurice Orowitz. Eugene Maurice Orowitz. Gene Orowitz doesn't sound very Hollywood-like, does it? Michael Landon, on the other hand, boy, that's a name. His parents were Peggy O'Neill, a dancer comedian, and Eli Maurice Orowitz. His father was Jewish and his mother was Roman Catholic. Eugene was the Orowitz's family's second child. Their daughter Evelyn was born 3 years earlier. When Landon was 4, he and his family moved to the borough of Collingswood, New Jersey, because he was born in, I believe, New York, Forest Hills neighborhood where they play the U.S. Open. He attended and celebrated his bar mitzvah at Temple Beth Shalom. His family recalls that Landon went through a lot of hassle for studying for the big event, which included bicycling to a nearby town every day in order to learn how to read Hebrew and recite prayers. During his childhood, Landon was constantly worried about his mother attempting suicide. On a family beach vacation, his mother tried to drown herself, but Landon rescued her. Shortly after the attempt, his mother acted as if nothing happened. And a few minutes later, he vomited. He said it was the worst experience of his life. Stress overload from the suicide attempts of his mother caused Landon to battle the childhood problem of bedwetting, which was documented in his unauthorized biography, Michael Landon, His Triumph and Tragedy. His mother put his wet sheets on display outside his window for all to see. What a bitch. Jesus. He ran home every day and tried to remove them before his classmates could see. These experiences were incorporated into his semi-autobiographical television movie, The Loneliest Runner, which he produced and directed. Wow. How about that? How'd you like to have your mother put your fucking bedwetting sheets on the windows. Jesus. So here we have the moon down there, right, in the fourth house. So that is the mother. And it's conjunct what? Algol. It's a wide conjunction with Algol. Really interesting. Now, the moon here is actually, um, it's actually nicely aspected with Mars. We'll come back to the moon because in a lot of ways it is the capstone for his career, right? Like he makes his first movie as I Was a Teenage Werewolf, which is very Scorpio, right? He's born on Halloween. He plays a monster, and then what he's really known for is, in a lot of ways, well, he obviously Bonanza was his big breakthrough, and Bonanza was on for years. Like it started in I think in the early '60s and ended in the '70s. It was one of the longest running TV shows. And what Bonanza has in common with Little House on the Prairie, which is really his big movie, or I'm sorry, his big series, is the moon in the fourth house and dealing with family. And these are rural families. Like Bonanza's a rural family. Little House on the Prairie is a rural family. And that's moon in Taurus, right? And so his career gets kind of played out by these bookends, the monster of I Was a Teenage Werewolf and ultimately Little House on the Prairie. The in conjunct with the moon and Mercury. Now, this is the mother. And he's got Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio, right? So he's got and for men, Lilith is the mother. Lilith is the mother. And it is the dark, shadowy, unrealized relationship with the mother. So you can see, with certainly with Mercury, and then Mercury, the wide conjunction with Black Moon Lilith, and Black Moon Lilith is like an anchor around Michael Landon's neck. Interesting. Now, when he was in high school, he was a state champion javelin thrower, and he had really long hair. Right. So there's his part of fortune in Leo. He got a scholarship to USC, and as a Michael Landon was kind of abused. I mean, clearly abused by his mother, but when he got to the frat, right, which is he's we got to the track team, and I think he joined a frat. They cut off all his hair as a joke, and he really thought that his javelin power and prowess came from his hair. And so, he started throwing the javelin shorter than he normally did. And then he overcompensated and he threw out his arm and he lost his scholarship to USC. But now, since he's in Hollywood, what else is a young lad going to do? He's going to become an actor. So his athletic ability helped him land this role. I Was a Teenage Werewolf. And, he has Capricorn rising. So one of the things that I've talked about with Capricorn rising is that people tend to get younger as they get older. And I think there's some truth to that with Michael Landon. When you look at, how people on the Little House on the Prairie set talked about him, they loved him. They loved him. Everybody on the set loved him. Like he was really their father in a lot of ways. He's an imperfect human, like we all are. He's got this grand cross here. Look at that. Saturn in Pisces, squaring off against Venus on one end and Jupiter on the other end in Sagittarius, and squaring off against Mars and Neptune, and squaring off against Chiron, and we get the oppositions. So he had a lot to overcome in a lot of ways. Like, that's horrific. That's fucking horrific. Putting the bed sheets on the window. Where was his father, right? Where was his milky toast father? Saturn down there in Pisces. Like the weak father. And there's nothing good about Saturn in his second house. It's squaring off against everything. Wow. The only thing Saturn might have is the trine to his sun, which probably gave him some staying power and endurance. Also, the 11th house to me is also very Bonanza-like, right? He's there with Purnell Roberts and Dan Blocker and Lauren Green, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then eventually Purnell Roberts leaves, and David Canary or Canary, however you say his name, he joins it. And when I think of Sagittarius, I think of horses. And Michael Landon spent a hell of a lot of time on a horse. And when I think of Bonanza, I think of they shot a lot of that on set in Nevada. Big open spaces, right? So you can see all this Sagittarius playing out in his chart on that set and in that TV series. It's wide open. It's expansive. It's like the Wild West, whatever that was. Has a lot of horse riding going on, and it's a group living together. Right? There's no woman in the household. It's all dudes, which is almost like a fraternity. So very interesting chart and troubled. You could tell that he probably had a drinking problem. I think he did have a drinking problem. Mars conjunct Neptune in Virgo, and not being able to live up to whatever standards that he thought he needed to live up to, and eventually dies of cancer. And but a very interesting chart, and an interesting transformation because of where he winds up in Little House on the Prairie, and how fond everybody is of him, and how he just played the role of the father, literally on the set. He was very protective of everybody. So Michael Landon, this is your True Hemp Science Star of the Day. All right, I got to get going. I got to set up for 15 minutes of flame over on Rumble. But thank you all for being here. And we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Astro Weather. Tell your friends about it. Hit the like button. It's very important. I should say this at the beginning of the show. But please hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And if you've subscribed and been unsubscribed, you may want to check and resubscribe again. And don't forget to hit the bell to let you know when we go live. It's very helpful for me. It's also very helpful for you. And together, we'll be able to, at the very least, for however long we're able to do it, share this experience with one another. All right. Take good care. Have a blessed day. Robert Phoenix signing off.